I still remember the sound my tires made when I turned around on Christmas Eve. Not because of the snow. There wasn't much that year. Just a thin layer of frost that made the streets of Columbus shimmer under the streetlights. I remember it because I honestly believed I had just lost my daughter. The text message sat on my dashboard while the red light at the intersection changed twice before I noticed the cars behind me were honking. Don't come until you apologize to my stepdad. ***. No explanation. No Merry Christmas. No phone call. Just 14 words that somehow erase 15 years of trying to be the kind of father who never made his daughter choose between her parents. I never answered. I simply put the truck in drive, made a slow U-turn, and headed back toward an empty house. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The truth actually began 6 weeks earlier, inside my garage. Now, if you've ever restored old furniture, you know there's a point where wood stops looking like lumber and starts looking like memory. That's how I felt about the little rocking horse sitting on my workbench. It had belonged to Emily when she was 3. She'd ridden it so hard that one runner had cracked clean through. I'd repaired it once back then, promising her it would last forever. Turns out forever sometimes needs another repair. I ran my hand across the smooth maple neck. Maple, not oak. People who don't work with wood think they all look the same. They don't. Every grain tells a different story. I smiled to myself as I rubbed another coat of finish into the wood. This old boy still has a few Christmases left. The garage smelled of sawdust, boiled linseed oil, and fresh coffee. It was quiet except for an old radio humming soft jazz somewhere behind the shelves. Retirement had made mornings slower. Not emptier, just slower. I'd spent nearly 40 years as an electrical contractor. You learn to fix problems before anyone notices they exist. Funny thing is, I spent the next 15 years doing exactly the same thing with my family. Only nobody ever noticed that either. But the hidden compartment took me nearly 3 evenings to finish. Nothing fancy. Just a carefully fitted panel beneath the saddle that disappeared into the grain once it was closed. The latch clicked perfectly. Unless someone knew where to look, they'd never find it. I opened it one last time. Inside sat a large cream-colored envelope. I checked everything again. Family photographs. Every Christmas, every birthday, every school recital I could quietly attend without creating tension. Receipts. Tuition payments. Medical bills. Summer camp. Insurance premiums. Closing costs from years ago. I wasn't trying to prove I loved Emily. Love doesn't belong on receipts. The receipts only proved I'd kept my promises. Beneath them rested a stack of handwritten Christmas letters. One for every year since the divorce. Letters I'd never mailed. Things a father thinks but doesn't always say. I hesitated before placing the final letter inside. It was addressed in careful block letters. Asterisk, asterisk for Noah. Open when you're older. Asterisk, asterisk. Emily's little boy had just turned 1. He'd never remember this Christmas. Maybe someday he'd understand why his grandfather believed truth could wait, but shouldn't disappear. I closed the envelope, slid it carefully inside, pressed the compartment shut. Click. Perfect. Finally, I reached underneath the rocking horse. A tiny brass key rested against the wood. I secured it with fresh tape exactly where I'd planned. Hidden. Safe. If everything went the way I hoped, I'd show Emily after Christmas dinner. Just the 2 of us. No speeches. No accusations. Just, there's something inside I think you should have. That was the entire plan. Simple. Quiet. Like always. 3 days before Christmas, my phone rang while I was reorganizing socket wrenches. Hey, Dad. Emily always sounded rushed in December. School concerts. Holiday crafts. A 1-year-old who had recently decided sleep was optional. You surviving? I asked. She laughed. Barely. I could hear Noah babbling somewhere in the background. Then came a loud metallic crash. Oh no. What happened? He discovered pots and pans. I smiled without realizing it. Some sounds never stop being funny. So, she continued, could you bring Noah's Christmas present over a couple days early? The rocking horse? Yeah, Christmas Eve is going to be crazy. I figured it'd be easier if it's already here. Of course. There wasn't even a second of hesitation. When should I come? Saturday afternoon? I'll be there. And Dad? Yeah? Thank you. She said it casually. The kind of thank you people don't think twice about. But I did. Parents remember those little moments, especially after divorce, especially when your daughter is grown. December 22nd was colder than expected. I wrapped the rocking horse in moving blankets before securing it carefully in the back of my pickup. The drive across town took about 30 minutes. Christmas decorations covered nearly every block. Inflatable snowmen. Plastic reindeer. Lights hanging crooked from gutters. Emily opened the front door before I reached the porch. There it is. Noah bounced in her arms the moment he saw the blanket-covered shape. Easy there, buddy, I laughed. He already thinks every package belongs to him. I mean, Ethan appeared from the kitchen carrying a mug of coffee. He's usually right. We all laughed. Ethan took one side while I lifted the rocking horse inside. The living room smelled like cinnamon candles and fresh pine. Their Christmas tree stood near the front window, half surrounded by wrapped presents. We placed the rocking horse beside the tree, right where Emily wanted it. It looked right, as though it had always belonged there. It turned out beautiful, Ethan said, kneeling beside it. I shrugged. It cleaned up better than its owner. Emily rolled her eyes. Oh, stop! She ran her fingers gently along the polished wood. Dad? Her voice softened. I remember riding this. You wore grooves into it. She smiled. I probably did. Noah leaned toward it immediately. Pa? Emily laughed. I think he's trying to say pony. Maybe. Or maybe not. Either way, hearing that little voice warmed something inside me I hadn't realized had grown cold. Emily hugged me before I left. I'll see you Christmas Eve. Wouldn't miss it. I looked back once while walking to my truck. The rocking horse stood beside the glowing Christmas tree, exactly where it was supposed to be. I had no reason to think I'd never move it again. No reason to imagine that before Christmas dinner was over, someone else would already be trying to hide what it contained. And I certainly had no idea that one text message was only 2 days away from changing everything. Christmas Eve morning, I woke up before the alarm. That still happens when you've spent most of your life working jobs that start before sunrise. Your body doesn't care that you're retired. It just opens your eyes at 5:42 and says, well, let's get moving. The house was cold enough that I could feel it in the kitchen tile through my socks. I turned on the coffee maker, stood there listening to it sputter, and looked out at the backyard while the sky slowly turned gray. My neighbor's inflatable Santa had tipped halfway over during the night, so it looked like he'd given up and gone face first into the frost. For some reason, that made me laugh. Not a big laugh, just enough to make the kitchen feel less empty. I had a casserole to make. Emily liked my chicken and rice casserole because it wasn't fancy. Cream soup, shredded chicken, buttered crackers on top. The kind of dish nobody brags about until the pan comes home scraped clean. I laid everything out on the counter like I was wiring a panel. Chicken. Rice. Mixing bowl. Casserole dish. One cracked old wooden spoon Susan had left behind years ago and never asked for back. I almost put it away. Then I didn't. Some habits survive longer than marriages. By 10, the kitchen windows were fogged from the oven heat. I wrapped the casserole in foil, wrote asterisk dad, heat 350 25ths min asterisk on a strip of masking tape, and stuck it across the top. Then I just stood there. I don't know how else to describe it. There are moments in a man's life when the house gets too quiet around him. Christmas Eve can do that. I thought about the rocking horse already sitting beside Emily's tree. I pictured Noah leaning over it, making that little sound. Pa? I smiled to myself. Maybe by next year, I said to the empty room, you'll have that word figured out. Around noon, I shaved. Put on a clean blue button-down. Changed into the nicer jeans Emily always said made me look less like I crawled out from under a house. At 4 o'clock, I checked the casserole again, even though there was nothing to check. At 4:30, I carried it carefully to my truck and started toward Emily's place. I remember feeling proud. That's the part that stings now. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't expecting trouble. I wasn't rehearsing speeches. I was just a father going to his daughter's house for Christmas Eve dinner. Sometimes the thing that breaks you doesn't announce itself. Sometimes it lights up on your phone at a red light. I was about 20 minutes from Emily's house when the message came in. The phone buzzed in the cup holder. I glanced down. Emily. I expected something ordinary. Asterisk, asterisk, can you grab ice? Asterisk, asterisk, running behind that asterisk, asterisk. Asterisk, asterisk, Noah spilled peas on himself, dot asterisk, asterisk. Instead, I saw, don't come until you apologize to my stepdad, dot asterisk, asterisk. I read it once. Then again. The truck behind me honked. I looked up and realized the light had turned green. My hand went to the gear shift, then stopped. Apologize? To Richard? For what? I pulled into the parking lot of a closed dry cleaner and sat there with the engine running. The casserole steamed faintly beside me. I called Emily. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. I stared at that message until the words stopped looking like words. Don't come. That was the part I heard loudest. Not call me. Not we need to talk. Don't come. 15 years of swallowing explanations rose up in my throat, and for 1 second, I almost typed back everything. Everything I had paid. Everything I had kept quiet. Every time Richard smiled at family gatherings like he'd carried the whole world on his shoulders, while I stood 3 steps back pretending not to notice. But then I saw Emily at 16, crying on my porch after the divorce because she thought loving one parent meant betraying the other. So I put the phone down. I didn't send a word. I turned the truck around. The casserole slid against the passenger door when I took the corner too sharp. Easy, I muttered, like it was alive. Then I drove home. Back at the house, I set the casserole on the counter and didn't unwrap it. For a while, I stayed in my coat. I stood in the living room beside my old recliner, watching the colored Christmas lights blink across the window glass. The house smelled like warm chicken and cold air. That is a strange combination. One makes you think of family. The other reminds you nobody came through the door. I opened the freezer and found a frozen lasagna I'd bought on sale sometime in November. The box said, asterisk, asterisk, family size, asterisk, asterisk, which felt like a little joke at my expense. I put it in the oven anyway. While it cooked, I sat in the rocking chair by the front window. Not Emily's rocking horse. That was at her house where it belonged. Mine was an old wooden chair I'd kept for years, the kind that creaked if you shifted wrong. I held the phone in my lap. No new messages. At 6:30, the lasagna was still cold in the middle. I ate the edges standing over the sink. That was my Christmas Eve dinner. I wish I could tell you I was angry. Anger would have been easier. Mostly I felt tired. The kind of tired sleep doesn't fix. What I didn't know was that, at Emily's house, dinner had started almost on time. Ethan later told me the details, and some of them I can still picture too clearly. Emily came downstairs with wet hair, and Noah in clean pajamas with little green dinosaurs on them. Her phone had been on the kitchen counter earlier, unlocked, because she'd been following a recipe while trying to bathe Noah after he smeared mashed banana in his hair. By the time she got back to the kitchen, Richard was carving the ham like he owned the room. Susan was setting rolls into a basket. Ethan was pouring iced tea, and my chair was gone. Not moved to the corner. Not squeezed against the wall. Gone from the table entirely. Emily stopped with Noah on her hip. Where's Dad sitting? Richard didn't even look up. He's not coming. What do you mean he's not coming? Richard sighed like the question exhausted him. I told him we needed an apology first. He made his choice. Emily shifted Noah higher on her hip. What happened? Sweetheart, Richard said, lowering his voice in that polished way of his. Not tonight. That was Richard's gift. He could make ending a conversation sound like kindness. Susan looked down at the rolls. Ethan watched Emily's face. Noah pointed toward the living room. Pa? Emily's mouth tightened. Not tonight, baby. Richard chuckled. He'll survive one Christmas without an audience. Nobody laughed. So Richard laughed a little louder. At dinner, he talked too much. That was what Ethan noticed first. Richard told everyone how busy he'd been getting Noah's big gift ready. Emily frowned. The rocking horse? Richard dabbed his mouth with a napkin. Well, it needed some work. Old oak dries out if nobody maintains it. Ethan looked across the table. Oak? Richard paused. Wood, Ethan. You know what I mean. But Ethan did know enough to know the difference. After dinner, they moved into the living room. The rocking horse sat beside the tree, glowing softly under the lights. Noah crawled straight toward it. Oh, Pa, he said again, patting the saddle. Emily went quiet. Richard lifted Noah onto it and smiled for pictures. You see, he said, Grandpa Richard came through. Ethan told me later that was when the room changed for him. Not because of what Richard said, because of how comfortably he said it. Like a man stepping into shoes that already belonged to someone else. Later, when Emily took Noah upstairs and Susan started rinsing plates, Ethan walked back toward the living room to grab his sweater. That's when he saw Richard crouch beside the rocking horse. At first, Ethan thought he was picking up wrapping paper. Then Richard glanced over his shoulder. Quick. Guilty. His hand moved under the belly of the horse. There was a small ripping sound. Tape coming loose. Richard slipped something into the pocket of his red Christmas sweater, stood up too fast, and nearly bumped the tree. Ethan froze in the hallway. Richard saw him. For one long second, neither man said a word. Then Richard smiled. You lose something? Ethan asked. Richard patted his sweater pocket. No, he said, just fixing a loose edge. But his face had gone pale around the mouth. And Ethan, calm as ever, looked from Richard to the rocking horse, and knew something under that saddle was worth hiding. Christmas morning is supposed to feel softer. Even when you're grown, even when the kids have kids of their own, there's usually a hush to it. Wrapping paper on the floor, coffee brewing, somebody wearing slippers they got 10 minutes earlier. At Emily's house that morning started with Noah banging a plastic spoon against the tray of his high chair. Ethan was the first one downstairs. He told me later he hadn't slept much. Not because of Christmas excitement. He was 42, a CPA, and not exactly the type to lie awake waiting for Santa Claus. He kept seeing Richard's hand under that rocking horse. The quick glance over his shoulder. The little ripping sound. The way Richard had patted his sweater pocket and said, just fixing a loose edge. Men like Ethan notice details most people walk past. That was his job. Numbers either matched or they didn't. Stories either balanced or they didn't. And Richard's story had started running a deficit around dessert. Emily was still upstairs getting Noah dressed when Ethan stepped into the living room with his coffee. The tree lights were still on from the night before, glowing weakly in the gray morning. The rocking horse sat beside the lower branches, exactly where I'd left it on December 22nd. Noah's little hands had already smudged the shine on the saddle. Ethan crouched beside it. He didn't touch anything at first. He just looked. The belly of the horse was smooth. No loose edge, no broken trim, no piece hanging off the way Richard had implied. Then Ethan ran one finger underneath. The tape was gone. That stopped him cold. He stood up slowly, looked toward the stairs, then toward the kitchen. Emily called down, "Coffee still hot?" "Yeah," he answered too quickly. "I think so." He didn't tell her. Not yet. He wasn't hiding it to protect Richard. He was trying to protect Emily from one more Christmas morning turning into a battlefield before he even knew what he'd found. That was Ethan. Careful first, then certain. The garage was colder than the house by a good 15 degrees. Ethan slipped out there after breakfast, saying he was looking for the extra trash bags. Emily didn't question him. Noah had just discovered that torn wrapping paper could be worn as a hat, and she was busy laughing for the first time since the night before. Richard and Susan hadn't come over yet. That mattered. Ethan wanted a few minutes without Richard's polished voice filling the room. The garage smelled like cardboard boxes, old paint, and winter air. He checked the shelf by the door first. Nothing. Then the workbench. Nothing. He moved slower after that. Not like a man searching for trash bags. Like a man retracing somebody else's steps. Near the corner sat a tall plastic bin where Emily stored holiday tablecloths and extra bows. On the floor beside it was a little red fuzz. One thread. From a Christmas sweater. Ethan stared at it. Then he knelt. Behind the bin, near the concrete wall, something caught the light. A tiny brass key. It had slid partly under a flattened cardboard box. Ethan picked it up between two fingers. Small. Old-fashioned. Not something that belonged to a modern toy. He closed his hand around it and stayed crouched there for a moment. Because once you find a key, you already know there's a lock. And once you know there's a lock, you have to decide whether you're ready for whatever it opens. He waited until Emily put Noah down for his nap. That was around 1. The house had gone quiet except for the dishwasher and the soft creak of branches against the front window. Emily came into the living room wiping her hands on a dish towel. "What are you doing?" Ethan was kneeling beside the rocking horse again. He looked up at her. "I need to show you something." Her face changed before he said another word. Maybe because of his tone. Maybe because people who love each other can hear bad news before it arrives. "What?" He opened his palm. The brass key sat there. Emily frowned. "What is that?" "I found it in the garage." "Okay." "I saw Richard take something from under the horse last night." She blinked once. "Ethan." "I know." "No, Ethan, listen. Please don't start something. It's Christmas." "I'm not starting anything." He kept his voice low. "That's the problem, Em. Something already started." She looked toward the stairs. Noah's sleeping. "I know." "Then why are we doing this right now?" "Because your father didn't come last night. Richard claimed he restored this horse. Then he took a hidden key from it and lied to my face." Emily's fingers tightened around the dish towel. "That doesn't mean—" "I didn't say what it means." He held out the key. "I'm saying there's a reason he didn't want us finding this." Emily stared at the rocking horse. I wish I could have seen her face then. Not because I wanted her hurt. God, no. But because that was the first crack in a wall I had spent 15 years quietly standing behind. She whispered, "Where would it even go?" Ethan ran his hand along the saddle, then beneath it. He pressed lightly in 3 places before something gave. A soft click. Emily took 1 step back. The panel loosened so cleanly it looked impossible. Ethan lifted it open. Inside was the cream-colored envelope. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. Emily covered her mouth. "That's Dad's handwriting." Ethan didn't reach for it right away. He looked at her first. "Do you want me to stop?" She shook her head, but not like she was brave. Like she already knew stopping would be worse. "Open it." They didn't read it in the living room. That would have felt too exposed, Ethan said. Too close to the tree, too close to Noah's toys, too close to the place Richard had posed for pictures pretending the gift was his. They carried the envelope to the kitchen table. Emily sat down slowly. The same kitchen where my empty chair had been discussed like an inconvenience. Ethan slid the contents out. Photographs came first. Emily at 9 in a blue winter coat outside a school concert. Emily at 12 holding a science fair ribbon. Emily at 16 standing beside Susan in front of a brick high school sign. Emily frowned. "I don't remember him being there." Ethan turned one over. On the back, in my handwriting, it said, "Didn't come inside. Didn't want to make it harder for her. Proud of her anyway, ... Emily pressed her fingertips to her lips. Another photo. Emily's college move-in day. Taken from across a parking lot. She laughed once, but it broke halfway through. "He was there?" Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The receipts came next. Neatly clipped by year. Tuition deposits. Orthodontist bills. Emergency room copays. Summer camp registration. Car insurance. A closing cost statement from years before, when Emily and Ethan bought their first small house. Emily picked that one up with a shaky hand. No, she said. Ethan leaned closer. What? She swallowed. Richard said he helped with this. Ethan looked at the paper. My God. No, he said. He said Mom and Richard wanted to help us get started. She turned the page as though the numbers might change if she looked hard enough. My name was there. Not Richard's. Mine. The letters came last. 15 Christmas letters, bundled with a rubber band. Emily touched them like they might burn her. Dad wrote all these? Ethan nodded. She opened the top one. Only read 3 lines before she had to stop. Her shoulders folded inward. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just a quiet collapse, like her body finally understood something her mind was still fighting. Ethan moved beside her and put a hand on her back. She whispered, Why didn't he tell me? Ethan said, Maybe he thought silence was protecting you. Emily closed her eyes. And who did it protect? Neither of them spoke after that, because the answer was already sitting between them. The strongest thing in that envelope wasn't a receipt. It was Susan's old letter. Emily recognized her mother's handwriting immediately. The paper had yellowed at the edges. She opened it with both hands. Ethan watched her read. Halfway down the page, Emily's chin started trembling. Susan had written it years earlier, after the divorce. She thanked me for helping with Emily's expenses. Thanked me for not forcing Emily into adult problems. Thanked me for letting her have peace even when it cost you credit you deserve. Emily put the letter flat on the table. Then she stood up, walked to the sink, gripped the edge. Her knuckles went white. Ethan came up behind her but didn't touch her right away. She said, He let me believe Richard was the steady one. Her voice was barely above a whisper. All these years. Ethan said, Emily. No, she shook her head. No, I did that too. I believed it because it was easier. A car door closed outside. Both of them froze. Through the kitchen window, Ethan saw Richard's sedan in the driveway. Emily wiped her face fast, almost angrily. Ethan gathered the photographs, receipts, letters, and Susan's letter into a neat stack. He did not put them back inside the horse. The envelope stayed on the kitchen table. The brass key lay beside it. Richard walked in through the side door without knocking, smiling like a man arriving to applause. Merry Christmas, he called. Then he saw the table. The smile slipped. Just a little, but enough. Emily turned toward him with wet eyes and my Christmas letter still in her hand. And for the first time in 15 years, Richard Lawson had no prepared story ready. Richard stood in Emily's kitchen with one hand still on the side door, smiling at evidence he didn't expect to see. That smile lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then his eyes moved across the table. Photographs, receipts, letters, Susan's old letter, the brass key. All of it spread out under the yellow kitchen light like somebody had taken 15 years and laid them flat. Emily didn't speak right away. That was what made him nervous. Richard knew how to handle crying. He knew how to handle anger. He could soften his voice, touch a shoulder, make himself sound wounded. But silence? Silence left him no wall to push against. He cleared his throat. Well, he said, forcing a chuckle. Looks like Daniel finally decided to make Christmas about himself. Emily's fingers tightened around my letter. Ethan stood beside the table, calm as stone. Careful, Ethan said. Richard looked at him. Excuse me? I said be careful. Richard's face tightened. Emily lifted one photograph. Did you know he was there? At my science fair? Richard glanced at it like it was a parking ticket. I don't remember every little school event from 20 years ago. It says he didn't come inside because he didn't want to make it harder for me. Richard waved a hand. That sounds like Daniel, always dramatic from a distance. Emily flinched, but she didn't fold. Not this time. She picked up the closing cost statement next. You told me you and Mom helped us with this. Richard looked toward the hallway, like he expected Susan to appear and rescue him. She knew your father contributed some things. Some things? Emily's voice cracked, but she kept going. Tuition, insurance, medical bills, camp, the down payment help. Richard, this isn't some things. His jaw moved. For the first time, Richard didn't answer fast enough. Ethan noticed. Emily noticed too. Finally, Richard sighed, like he was the one being mistreated. All right, yes, Daniel paid for certain expenses. Emily stared at him. And you let me believe you did. I never said every dollar came from me. You let me believe it. Richard leaned on the back of a chair. I let you believe what kept this family peaceful. That sentence changed the room. Emily set the paper down slowly. No, she whispered. You let me believe what made you look good. Richard's face hardened. You have no idea what it was like dealing with your father after the divorce. Ethan said, don't change the subject. Richard snapped, this is family business. I'm her husband, and I'm the man who raised her. Emily's head came up. No, she said. One word. Small. But it landed hard. Richard blinked. Emily wiped her cheek with the heel of her hand. You were in my life. You helped raise me. I won't pretend you didn't, but you don't get to erase Dad because it makes you feel bigger. Richard's mouth opened. Nothing came out. For once, he had no polished sentence ready. Nobody slept much that night. Emily kept the envelope on the kitchen table. She didn't put it back inside the horse. She couldn't. The rocking horse stayed in the living room beside the tree, quiet and bright, while everything around it started falling apart. Susan came over later that evening after Emily called her. Ethan said she walked in pale, still wearing her winter coat, and when she saw her old letter on the table, she sat down like her knees had given out. Oh, Emily, she said. You knew? Susan's eyes filled. I knew your father helped. I didn't know Richard was taking credit for it. Richard stood near the counter with his arms crossed. Susan, she turned on him. Don't. That one word from her surprised everybody, maybe even herself. Emily looked from one parent to the other. I spent years thinking Dad just stepped back. Susan covered her mouth. He stepped back because I asked him not to make you choose. Emily's face twisted. Mom, I thought I was protecting you. Emily laughed once, and it sounded nothing like joy. Everybody keeps saying that. The kitchen went quiet again. Outside, a car passed slowly, tires crunching over old frost. Inside, Noah stirred on the baby monitor, made one soft sound, then settled. That little noise broke Emily. She turned away from all of them, pressed both hands to the counter, and cried without trying to make it pretty. Ethan went to her. Richard didn't. And that, more than anything, told Ethan who Richard really was. So, the next morning, December 26th, Richard tried to rebuild the lie. That's what men like him do. They don't apologize first. They explain. Emily had barely poured coffee when Richard arrived again, carrying bakery muffins nobody wanted. He set the box on the counter. I think emotions ran too high last night. Emily didn't touch the coffee. Ethan leaned against the sink, arms folded. Richard looked at the table. The envelope was still there. The brass key still beside it. His eyes flickered toward it. Emily saw that. I want the truth, she said. Richard exhaled. You have pieces of it. No, I have Dad's receipts, Dad's letters, Mom's letter. I want your truth. Richard's voice softened. Sweetheart, your father never corrected anyone. Emily stared at him. What? He had chances, birthdays, graduations, Christmases. He could have spoken up. He chose not to. Ethan said, that doesn't explain you taking credit. Richard's hand tightened around the edge of the muffin box. I did what fathers do. I kept things stable. Emily's face went still. You knew. Richard hesitated. Too long. You knew he paid those bills, she said. I knew he contributed. You knew the whole time. Richard looked away. That was the admission. Not clean. Not honest. Forced out by the weight of papers he couldn't talk around anymore. Emily sat down slowly. Her voice dropped. Then why did Dad not come on Christmas Eve? Richard straightened. I told you, he refused to apologize. For what? Richard blinked. For his attitude. What attitude? You know how he is. No, I don't, because apparently nobody let me know him. Ethan stepped forward. Did you talk to Daniel that night? Richard's mouth tightened. I sent a message. Emily looked up. You sent a message? Richard's face changed. Just a flicker. But enough. I mean, the message was sent. Emily reached for her phone on the counter. Richard took one step toward her. Emily, don't turn this into some investigation. Ethan moved between them without raising his voice. Stay there. Emily's hands shook as she opened her messages. The thread with me showed only my earlier messages from December 22nd. Nothing from Christmas Eve. No argument. No apology demand. No reply from me. Her breathing changed. I didn't delete anything. Ethan came beside her. Check recently deleted. She looked at him. I don't even know if... I do. It took less than a minute. 1 minute to undo 15 years. There it was. A deleted text. Timestamp 5:30 p.m. Christmas Eve. Sent from Emily's phone. Don't come until you apologize to my stepdad. ****. Emily stared at the screen. Then she looked at Richard. Not confused anymore. Not doubtful. Empty. Richard lifted both hands. Emily, listen to me. You used my phone. You were overwhelmed. Noah was crying. I was trying to avoid a scene. You used my phone. Her voice rose on the second one, sharp enough that Noah began crying upstairs. Susan covered her face. Ethan whispered, I'll get him. But Emily shook her head. No, I'll go. She walked past Richard like he wasn't there. Halfway up the stairs, she stopped. Without turning around, she said, You made me hurt my father. Richard said nothing. The baby cried harder. Emily kept climbing. And downstairs, beside the untouched muffins and the open envelope, Richard finally looked afraid. Nah. The next morning, December 27th, Ethan called me. I was in my garage cleaning tools that were already clean. When my phone rang and I saw his name, something in my chest tightened. Daniel, he said. Ethan. There was a pause. Then he said, We found the compartment. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I could smell maple dust and coffee again. Emily knows? She knows enough. I sat down on the shop stool. Is she all right? No, Ethan said quietly, but she wants to be. That nearly broke me more than the text had. Before I could answer, headlights swept across my garage window. A car pulled into my driveway. Not Emily's. Not Ethan's. Richard Lawson stepped out, buttoning his coat against the cold. Ethan was still on the line. Daniel, he asked. I watched Richard walk toward my door. I'll have to call you back, I said. Then the doorbell rang. When Richard Lawson showed up at my door on December 27th, I knew before he opened his mouth that he hadn't come to apologize. Men who come to apologize stand differently. They look smaller somehow. Richard stood on my porch with his shoulders squared, his wool coat buttoned neat, and that same public smile he used at church potlucks and school fundraisers. The one that said he was reasonable, respectable, and prepared to forgive me for making things uncomfortable. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. Daniel, he said. Richard. Cold air moved between us. Behind me, the garage smelled like metal tools and old sawdust. Behind him, his sedan idled in my driveway, exhaust drifting white under the gray morning sky. He glanced past my shoulder. We should talk inside. No. His smile tightened. All right, fine, I'll be brief. That was the first lie. He wasn't brief. He started with bargaining. Emily's upset. You know how emotional she gets when family pressure piles up. I said nothing. He shifted his weight. Hey, this doesn't have to become ugly. We can all sit down, explain things carefully, and move forward. You don't want Noah growing up around bitterness, do you? There it was. A baby used like a shield. I kept one hand on the door frame. What exactly are you asking me to do? Richard's eyes narrowed a little. He didn't like direct questions. I'm asking you to be mature. I see. Tell Emily this was a misunderstanding. Tell her you should have spoken up years ago. I'll acknowledge some confusion about expenses. Confusion. He heard my tone and tried another road. I can reimburse you for some of it. That almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because it was so small. 15 years of silence, a daughter's trust, Christmas Eve alone with frozen lasagna. And Richard thought the problem had a dollar amount. I looked at him for a long moment. You think I kept receipts because I wanted repayment? His face flushed. I'm trying to solve this. No, you're trying to survive it. For the first time, his polished mask slipped all the way. You always did this, he said, voice low, acting noble, standing back, letting everyone think you were above the mess. I stood back because Emily was a child. And now you get to play the wounded saint. I opened the door wider, not to welcome him, but to make it clear the conversation was ending. You sent that text from her phone. His jaw clenched. She would have sent it eventually. No, Richard, she wouldn't have. He looked away first. That told me everything I needed. Then came the emotional blackmail. If you blow this family apart, that's on you. I stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked under my shoes. I didn't expose you. I didn't call Emily. I didn't show up waving papers at Christmas dinner. He stared at me. I built a rocking horse for my grandson, I said. That's all I did. His mouth opened, but nothing useful came out. So I gave him the only answer I had left. You should go. He stood there another few seconds, waiting for the old Daniel to make things easier. The old Daniel didn't. Finally, he walked back to his car. I watched him leave. And for the first time in 15 years, silence didn't feel like surrender. January 2nd was Emily's idea. She called me the night before. Not Ethan. Not Susan. Emily. When I saw her name, I had to sit down before answering. Hi, Dad. That was all she said at first. 2 words. But I heard the little girl who used to stand in my garage wearing pink rain boots, asking if she could help me fix electricity. Hi, sweetheart. She cried then, quietly. I let her. After a while, she said, I'm having Christmas dinner tomorrow, a late one. I looked toward the dark kitchen. That's nice. I want you there early. Early. Not tolerated. Not squeezed in. Not called after everyone else had arrived. Early. My throat tightened. All right. And Dad? Yeah? I'm not asking you to make a speech. I don't have one. I know, she breathed out shakily. That's why I need you there. Nah. When I arrived the next afternoon, my chair was at the table. Not just any chair. Mine. The same wooden dining chair Emily had always placed near the kitchen entrance, because I liked having a little room for my bad knee. I noticed it before I noticed anything else. Emily saw me notice. Her eyes filled, but she didn't rush me. Noah was on the floor in the living room, pushing a toy truck into the leg of the rocking horse. The horse sat beside the tree, still polished, still steady. The envelope was back inside it now, Emily told me later. But the brass key lay on the coffee table. Plain as daylight. Richard arrived last. Of course he did. Susan came in before him, pale and quiet. She hugged me at the door and held on longer than she ever had after the divorce. I'm sorry, she whispered. I said, I know. That was all either of us could manage. Dinner began politely. Too politely. Forks touched plates. Glasses were passed. Noah dropped a roll and laughed like he'd invented comedy. Then Emily stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't shake papers in anyone's face. She simply walked to the coffee table, picked up the brass key, and held it in her palm. I need everyone to understand why Dad wasn't here on Christmas Eve. Richard set down his fork. Emily, not now. She looked at him. Yes, now. No one moved. Ethan sat beside her, steady and silent. Emily opened the rocking horse compartment and removed the envelope. Piece by piece, she laid out the truth. The photographs, the receipts, the letters, Susan's old note. She didn't embellish. She didn't accuse beyond what the evidence showed. That made it worse for Richard. Because there was no drama for him to attack. Only paper. Dates. Handwriting. Facts. When she reached the deleted text, Richard pushed back his chair. I won't sit here and be humiliated. Emily looked tired when she answered. Then don't. He stared at her. For one terrible second, I thought she might soften. Old habits are stubborn things. But she didn't. Richard looked around the table, searching for one person willing to rescue him. No one did. So he left. The front door closed hard enough to rattle the wreath. Noah startled. I picked him up before thinking. He settled against my chest, one hand gripping my shirt. Pa, he mumbled. Emily covered her mouth. And this time, nobody corrected him. Nah, healing did not happen that night. I don't want to lie about that. Emily apologized, yes. She cried. I cried too, though I turned my face toward the window because some habits take longer to die. But trust doesn't rebuild just because the truth finally gets invited to dinner. It came back in small pieces. Coffee on Saturdays. A call on a Tuesday because Noah had a fever, and Emily wanted to know what I used to do when she was little. A trip to the hardware store where Ethan asked me which drill set was worth buying, then actually listened. Susan and I had one hard conversation in a diner off Henderson Road. She admitted she had chosen peace so often that she stopped asking who was paying for it. I told her I had done the same. Neither of us left proud. But we left honest. More of Richard's lies surfaced over the next few months. Nothing as big as the text, but enough. Stories polished too smooth. Credit taken too easily. Apologies avoided like potholes. Emily stopped calling him Dad Richard, then stopped calling him much at all. I never told her what to do. That was her road to walk. Mine was simpler. Show up. Answer the phone. Hold Noah when he reached for me. Let Emily see that love didn't need a performance to be real. The next Christmas, I arrived at Emily's house before noon. She had asked me to. The porch smelled like pine and cold air. Inside, homemade lasagna bubbled in the oven. Not frozen. Homemade. Emily smiled when she saw me looking at it. I figured you deserved a better Christmas Eve dinner this year. I swallowed hard. Noah came running from the living room faster than his little legs could manage. Grandpa! He hit my knees with both arms. Behind him, the rocking horse stood beside his own little Christmas tree, the envelope tucked safely back inside, the brass key now on my key ring. At the dining table, my chair was waiting. No speech. No drama. Just a place. Emily walked over, touched my sleeve, and said one word. Dad? And that was when I finally understood. I hadn't lost my daughter that Christmas Eve. I had only stopped protecting the lie that stood between us. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever stayed silent to protect someone, only to realize that silence was protecting the wrong person? Share your story in the comments. And if you enjoyed listening, don't forget to like, subscribe, and come back for more stories about family, second chances, and standing up for yourself. Until next time, take care of the people who truly deserve your love.